I have a wonderful staghorn fern here that I took growing. And come on in. I'm Brad Burkhart. I'm honored today to show you how I create my artwork. You'll see all stages, and you'll also see this finished result. I originally get these images through this sort of autonomic sketching process, and it's evolved quite a bit over the years. I didn't really think it was artwork initially, but I have some of the early work here in these journals that I keep, and sometimes I put little symbolic covers on them. But anyway, this will give you an idea of some of the early work where I'm just sort of randomly drawing lines, and nothing's very finished here. This was done back in, I think, around 1977. And then kind of moving on from there, you can kind of see some of the more pencil. That was ink kind of sketching, and then these are pencil ones that are kind of half finished. And then they start to move into more finished pieces here. You can kind of see different images. When I finish them, I get some areas are darker, some areas are lighter, and as the years have gone by, this one was done back in 2005 or so, and then I have some here, I think from even a little bit earlier. You can see they get a little more sophisticated with time as the drawings develop more and become more complex. This is the most recent one here, where I've done some work out of, and you can see they're quite a bit more detailed than in the earlier pieces. I'm going to move on now to how I actually translate the sketches into the actual clay relief panels. So I'm going to start over here at my workbench. Originally, these clay slabs are put on top of a piece of plywood, usually with plastic over it. But in the last few years, I've developed this frame. So I get the clay done, and then I pull the frame off. And then I have basically a flat slab that I'm dealing with here. And I take the sketches. In this case, we're going to be working on this piece here. I do a scan of it so that I can put it in a plastic sleeve, and then I can put it up here on my workbench, and I'll take all of the plastic and put it underneath here. So basically I'm starting with a flat slab about 1.5 inches thick. I'll start with like a little piece of pointed wood here as a way, sort of like to pencil in, and I need to kind of set the proportions first on the piece. So you can see there's a line, a main line that crosses right here, so that's where I'm going to probably start my first line on the piece, and I may have to adjust this later to make sure it's fitting the slab properly. The size of these slabs are actually based on a proportion called the golden mean, which was considered to be the most attractive proportions by the Greeks, and it seems to relate to how we see the world. So I've got this first line in here, and then I start to see different figures. I've got a heart up in this area, so I'm going to try to put the heart in next here. Now you see I've got the two major features, this line and this, and then there's a break here, right about in this area. And I'm beginning to try to think about this piece in a way that will give depth to the sketch. And you can see in this particular sketch that what looks like it's the farthest back is this sort of area with the bubbles that look like the sky in the background. And then there's this platform kind of in the future here. It almost looks like this person is looking over the edge. And then there are what look like slats that come in here like this way. So I'm going to want to try to establish the depth on this piece by, this would be the furthest forward. Then I'll go back slightly to this level, and that'll be the back, the very back of the piece. And in the meantime, I'm kind of defining where my figures are going to go in here. So you can see here, there's like a figure, and there you can see the line of the foot comes right along the line here. And same over here. And again, I may have to adjust this as I move along in the process. You can see the heart sits right up here, somewhere along this line. My guess is it's right about in there. And this will change as I move through the piece. So here's some shoulder, then it comes down, and a hand here, and I believe this is kind of the face there. And again, I'll be redefining this as we go along. And so that kind of gives you a little bit of a character sense there. And then this has got this other person here, which is kind of coming around here. There's a face here. Okay, making some progress here. And we've got this hand here. Coming over. Okay. So you can see I've got pretty much the main figures in here, and I may have to adjust the size of some of these as things go on. But then next I'm going to try to define my depth in the piece. And but leaving the pieces I'm going to have come forward from that, like the heart is coming forward from that background. And there could be a little bit of variation in this later. I might make it a little deeper at the back of the heart or something. But basically I'm trying to just get a feel for what the relief levels are, okay? And if there's some fine details, I can always add those later. Okay. And I also have this other tool for little smaller areas. Again, this is pretty straightforward at this point. I'm just cutting away sections to make sure there's depth, the proper depth in the piece. And a lot of this clay will be used later as a buildup of the relief. This is called Rio Red clay. It comes from aardvark clay down in the LA area. And what's interesting about the clay is it's what's called a high-fired clay, which when clays are fired, they're fired to different cone levels, 10 being the highest temperatures. And high fired is considered something over about 7, and this, or 6 or 7, and this is about a 6 or 7. And normally high fired clays, they tend to shrink and swell a lot in the kiln. So they have little particles that are often embedded in the wet clay called grog, which don't shrink and swell so fast. And so it keeps the piece from cracking during the firing process, and we'll talk more about that later. But basically, this is a very unusual clay in that it's a high-fired clay with no grog in it. And why that's significant is it allows me to get very fine detail in the piece. I'm drawing here without hitting little hard particles. And that's kind of a nice feature. And you can see this is going to be my forward plane here, so I'm going to come back from that so that this kind of comes up to this line, but it starts out at the back much lower. So it gives the feeling of moving into space in the background. Okay. And again, we're going to adjust this as we move along, but I may make it a little deeper in the back here. But this will be my flat front plane here. You can see there is a certain amount of depth that this has as well. And I'm kind of looking at this and seeing that it's almost like there's a wall back there, and then I might have to change this. We'll see. I'm going to try this and see how it looks. So I've kind of made a little bit of a decision here that instead of this just gliding back from this line, that this line here in the front is going to be the one that comes back, and then I'm going to have a little bit of a kind of a wall effect back here. Again, I'm just kind of still roughing things in here at this point. And then at the very back, I'm going to have it come in just a little bit more here, so that it actually does kind of look like a wall back there. Okay, you can kind of see how that's starting to bring in the relief. And still kind of bringing it down here till it gets to the place where I want it. And this will go through several stages of development, and even sometimes I'll pick up pieces and readjust them as to where they are on the slab if it doesn't look right to me. Okay, looking pretty good here now. Okay. All right, so then the next stage, after I've kind of got see, I might even add a little more here on this to make this even a little higher relief here. I don't want to cut too deep in the slab because it'll get too thin and might not fire properly. But now I'm kind of adding a little more depth here than it would have been in the original slab. combination of, you know, handwork and tool work working together. And it'll all supposedly, if it's done right, come together here in the end. Okay, so you can kind of see there's a little bit of a depth in the piece. There's the background, a little bit of a foreground, and then this sort of planked platform here. Hopefully that'll all work when we come together. And then I start defining the figure at this point by I'll start probably with the head here. And I want to kind of get a sense of how that's going to work, because this figure is a little farther forward than the one in back. So I think I'm going to start on the one in back first so that I can get a feeling for how far I want this one to come out. And you can see the leg here starting to come into shape. And this is where I end up pushing stuff up a little bit, because you can see here there's a little bit of extra. And then here's a foot. Again, it's very ill-defined at this point, but we're starting to get there. You can see the basic shapes. And her butt is coming into focus here. And there's a little bit of a curve in this figure, so the head is going to be kind of coming up. It's kind of what I'm feeling here. And again, it's very rough at this point. Everything will be defined later. But there's an arm here you can see coming around. And again, I'm just sort of roughly defining this right now, but and I can put these curls in the hair in later if I need to. Right now I'm just trying to find out, where the main things are here. And you can see the figure is starting to come in. Here's her other leg. And now you see this one's going to have to come out farther for that part of it to come over the leg. Here's an arm coming out here and going in again with the hand here. You can kind of see it starting to rough in a little bit here. Again, it's very rough at this stage, just trying to get the proportions kind of approximate. And I'm seeing that this is much bigger than it needs to be, so I'm going to cut a little off of that. And again, there's a problem in moving from the 8.5 by 11 size to this larger size in the, finished piece. Okay, and now we're kind of, again, we just got this all roughed in here. We're not finished with anything. We're just kind of roughing things in. So I'm going to look at this other piece now, this other person here, and I want them to come out quite a bit more because they're going to be overlooking this, see? And in this case, what I'll probably do is move the face away from the face of the relief so that the face is actually looking down, as you can see. And you can see I'm starting to use up my clay now, and yeah, real rough, but we're kind of seeing something emerging here, and that's what's important. And then I've got this leg here, come down, and it sits right on the bottom here. Mm-hmm. And then we've got this. You can kind of see there's like a chest there with an arm coming down here. And then she's got a, I think it's a she. She's got a shoulder on there, and okay, and then we're coming down here, and we've got a back leg coming off this way, a little lower down, I think. And I'm, again, moving between spaces here, so this leg is actually coming sort of from behind the figure and then coming down to this plane that we've established across here. And then there's another leg right in the middle here, which basically comes right down in the middle to a foot here. And as I'm doing that, I'm saying, oh, well, this has got to come out a little more, or the leg doesn't look like it's really real or whatever. So we're doing pretty good here. The heart I'll probably put in later because it's not that hard to do. And this face will get defined more later too. but we know it's got a kind of a half moon up there on top, and it's looking down a bit. This clay is still pretty wet, so I can move things around and they'll still stick together basically. So okay, so what I do is when I get it kind of to this stage, I've kind of got it somewhat defined, and you'll see, you can already see the relief in it where it's going to be relieved, and I sometimes will then take some water, and again, I kind of like the idea of this coming out a little more here rather than just being completely flat. But basically we're putting in the bones of the piece right now, and then the next one I'll show you on a different piece how we can add more detail to it. Okay. Okay. So what I might do at this point, since it's kind of basically roughed in, you can kind of see the basic figures and everything. The details will be added later, is I will use some water to kind of just smooth everything out and get a feeling for the overall proportions. I'm going to be doing more cutting in that a little later, but you can kind of see the basic piece here. This water stuff will probably happen a couple of times, and you know, I'll have to adjust things, but I just want to see what the basic figures looking like here. And you can see as I smooth things out, the image starts to get a little more defined, and again, that'll be refined even more in the final process. But I've got something going here, you can see, that looks at this point like the original sketch, but has depth, which the original sketch really didn't have. And we'll be adding more, like this hair stuff I can add later. You know, it's not that hard to add another layer on here. But I basically want to get something that is, you know, well enough defined that I can again look at the proportions on it and decide if it's in the right place on the slab, and I can start to define a few of the muscles around the figure and stuff like that. But at this point it's been kind of a cut and paste process. But as you can see with the water, I can smooth things out, even them up, you know, get a better feel for what the forms are, so they're not so conflicted with all the little fissures in the clay and stuff. But still pretty rudimentary here. We definitely don't have a finished piece here. Okay. but you can see there's a little more depth of this figure than there is in the actual sketch. Now it actually looks like a real figure, even though it's pretty, you know, rudimentary, but see, now here you can see this is going to probably have to come out just a little bit more to give it the kind of depth it needs. And I'm kind of adding some depth here. And knowing kind of what body parts look like help you define the shape of these things. There's my others. This is kind of the roughed in stage. You can kind of see the relief in the piece. I'm going to not finish this piece today. I'm going to go on to another piece that's almost done where I can start to add a little more detail. I won't be finished either, but you'll get a feeling for what things start to look like when I add the fine detail. So that'll be step 3, I guess, of this process. So I'm going to take this and basically put it away for now. I'll finish it later and keep it moist so I can still work it when I come back. Alright, so this piece I've been working on for about a week now, and you can see a couple things. First of all, the images are a lot more defined. I'm going to show you the sketch here real quick.
Okay.
Alright. And I'll set it right up there so you can kind of compare. This is kind of the secondary finish stage where you can see most of the figures are fairly well defined right now, but there's still a lot of detail that needs to be added. And I'm still smoothing things, and you can see it's kind of interesting. This pattern down here, I've kind of taken a little bit of liberty with it and given it some depth and stuff. And then you'll notice some nails sticking out of here, and those are actually put in there so when I put the plastic over so that the piece is kept moist when I'm not working on it, it won't crush some of the pieces. And even some of these wings here, like that come out, they have a nail underneath there so that it won't fall until it's completely dried out. So I'm not going to finish this piece today, but I am going to kind of do a few little things on here that'll give you an idea of you know, what goes on in the finishing. I'm using a little bit different tools, a lot more smoothing, getting the surfaces worked out. I can do a lot of this with my fingers actually. If it's not an even surface, I can smooth things out. And continually as I'm working, I'm dropping little pieces of clay, so I'll have to do this right up till the end. And I'm not going to work a lot on the background today, but I thought I would work on adding some detail to some of these pieces, just to give you an idea how that happens. And it's kind of fun. So I use a lot of finer tools for this. In this case, I'm using what's called a needle tool, which is kind of fun. And it is able to make very fine lines in the clay. And you can see here, I've got this striped form basically, but I want to make sure I get the actual form defined really well without a bunch of bumps in it before I start putting that in. But you can see here it kind of comes up around. So this will dry a little bit, and then I will probably just gently redefine some of those areas. And when the piece is finally finished, it will be dark and light and dark and light. And I see that it isn't quite coming out the way I want it to, in terms of these lines are coming up higher on the piece and mine are coming out lower. So I'm going to actually just start this over again and see if I can get it to be more like the picture. No, not doing what I want. There we go. So that's kind of the pattern on there. And then I've also got another pattern over here in the background, and you can see that is defined by these striping on these different Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm. Working. Mm-hmm. Let's see here. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you can kind of see there's some pattern emerging here. And then the other thing that I'm going to do on just to sort of finish up on this piece for now is you can see I still have to define this mustache on here. But I think I'm not going to work on that so much today. What I want to do today is just give you an idea of how I would add some patterning to this piece. And I'm just going to do a little bit of it here today just to give you a feel for it. But some of these will be painted darker later and some will be painted lighter. And I see I'm kind of making some choices here, but what I see is that some are bigger than others. So what I'm trying to do is get a little bit of a patterning over here that I can do a different size. And then it adds a little bit more depth to it. So there's big ones and small ones, and they So anyway, I'm not going to do any more than that today, but you can kind of see how it comes out into a pattern like what is on the drawing. And then later I will add this little beard down here and this mustache. And the background, I'll make a decision on these little pieces. I'll either cut them into the background, or I might add them as little pieces later, depending on how I think they look. Okay, so that's it for stage 3. I'm going to wrap her again, and I'll come back and finish this later this week. And then we'll move on to what happens next, which is that once these are done like this, I gradually I don't put this plastic over, I put a piece over the top and gradually let it dry out till it's like to the point where if I push on it, I can't push into it. It's still moist, but it's still workable, I should say, okay? And when it reaches that stage, then I take it out again. And let me put this one away in the meantime. Get strong doing this. But as far as I know, this process is kind of unique to my work. I don't know anybody else who works this way exactly. In fact, a number of people who fired my work feel that they think it's going to break up in the kiln because it's too thick, but it doesn't. All right, so that's that. Sit over here, and I'm going to take this piece off here now. And we can take a look at the couple things here. We can take a look at the picture. This is the original picture. Now you notice a few things are missing here. One is there's no beaks on these little butterfly-like things. I'm planning, and there's no little hat with a moon on here. I'm planning on adding those later, probably in metal, and maybe possibly the moon in some kind of, it could even be a bead, a rock bead or something like that. I like that. I've been moving more into that. So, as I say, when I get done with these, the first thing I do is they're about half dry, and I take them off of the plastic. The plastic is covering the wood, and the way I get them off is I have to kind of tip them up, okay, and I'm going to do this real gently because this isn't fired. And then I carve out, and this is a fairly traditional technique with things that you're putting in a kiln, I carve out the thicker areas so they are about the same thickness as the rest of the piece, because when they're being fired, they shrink and swell a lot. And if they have different thicknesses, they shrink and swell at different rates and can crack. And when I was first working, I was having a lot of problems with not only cracking, but if air gets entrapped in the pieces, the air expands and they explode and break the piece. So I was only working in half size, and then I came up with this technique with this needle tool that I use now. And you saw me using it earlier. And what happens is, when these are half dry, after carving them out, I go about every ½ inch all over, almost through the piece. And so when they're fired, they breathe like a waffle. Any air gets out those little holes, and that allowed me to go to the larger size and not have to worry about them exploding in that. Okay? So then, after that is done, I come back to the front, and sometimes these little needle holes are coming through in areas. I have to smooth that all out again, make it all so it doesn't look like there's any needle holes at all. And then I use this product, it's called iron oxide, and it's a powder, if I've got it here. Oh, there it is. So there's two compounds that are put on these pieces, and One is this iron oxide powder, which is basically kind of a red iron powder that gets mixed into water. Okay, and you can kind of see it there. And it settles out over time. So I usually come back and stir that up, and I have to add more iron oxide at certain points. I'm going to put a little more water in here. I, over time, got interested in darker and lighter colors in the pieces. And if you put an even layer of this iron oxide on, it all comes out about the same brown color. But if you put it really heavy on some areas, like you can see in this piece here, I've got dark areas and light areas, then they will come out that way in the firing differentiated, okay? And so I use that as a way to basically get the difference in the colors. And then I have various brushes I use, but for the finer detail I use these Japanese ink brushes. And so I'm not going to do a lot on this piece today, but I want to do, and then when it's all done, when I painted everything, there's this other product that's called Colemanite, and it's a white powder. I think there's only one mine left in the United States where this comes from, but it lasts pretty much forever in terms of my work, because I don't use a lot of it. And I mix it with water in a dispenser like this, and then I shake it up and spray it over the piece, and you'll see later one of the pieces ready to fire. So it looks like there's this white film over the whole piece. And when the piece is fired, that white film makes the iron oxide kind of shiny. And some people think it makes it look kind of bluish in color. But it isn't really blue. And so I'm not going to do a lot on this piece today, but I thought what I would do is we would color in the parts that are going to be the darkest. Like in this area it'd be this, and I'm just going to be painting this on. I have to be careful it doesn't run into the areas where I don't want it to, namely the areas that are lighter next to it. So you can see the waist of the figure is light, but the heart is dark, and I actually will probably apply several layers here on this just to make it and if I make a little mistake, I can use a sponge, which I have some here, to even it out. I get it wet, and if it's a really dark area and I want it light, I can wipe it off. So that's kind of, and then if I need to put more iron oxide in there, you can see if I apply several layers, and this is where the Japanese brush comes in, I can come right up to the edge of the area that I want to paint. And even in some cases, like here, you can see there's a little groove there at the edge. I can drip this in there, and it will fill the groove. See that? But not go on to the rest of the piece. And it's because I'm using these Japanese ink brushes, basically. See? It's pretty cool, actually. And this probably could be a little bit darker. I may need to add some more iron oxide. But you can kind of get a feeling for if you put a second layer on, it gets a little darker. And I have to be a little bit careful if I get too much iron oxide on the brush. I want to brush it out on a bigger part of the piece so it doesn't drip onto the part where I don't want it to go. It's not too different from painting in a way. So here would be an example where I kind of went over the line a little bit, and I can take some just clear water and even that out so it's a clean line. And you can see these are also dark. And I have to be careful here that I'm not dripping on anything below, because it's going to be extremely difficult if I have to clean out anything underneath there. But you can also see with the brush that I can come down to these very fine areas, and I'm going to use an even finer brush here, and basically kind of make it look like it comes to a point there. See what I mean? So this is kind of how the painting goes. As I say, the lighter areas I will dilute the iron oxide even a little further to make lighter colors. Sometimes it's so diluted you hardly can tell there's any in it, but it does fire. And then I spray this colemanite powder over the top, and I want to show you then when it's ready for firing, I have to dry it out again after it's painted because there's more water goes on the piece. This is what the pieces look like when they're getting ready to be fired, and you can see they look like they have this white kind of film over it, and that's the colemanite, which is sprayed over the top, and then there's the darker iron oxide underneath. But there's actually iron oxide on these lighter areas, it's just that there's not very much of it. One of the things about firing that is unpredictable is that you never know quite how things are going to turn out. We always say we turn it over to the kiln god. But sometimes, like in my most recent firings down here, even though there is a contrast between dark and light, there's a more even tone over the piece than, say, a piece like this, which has really dramatic contrast between lights and darks, or this piece here. And then in some cases, when air is let back into the kiln after the reduction takes place, unusual effects will come in. Like in this piece here, it looks like a burst of air came in here because this whole area is lighter than the background, even though it had the same kind of finish on it, a lighter finish. Or, I'm sorry, let me see another one here that has that sort of effect on it. Like here, this has a very light area right on the edge of the piece, and that's because when the air was left back in it, it burst in on that side of the kiln and it caused an unusual effect. I find I like that variability. It really gives a lot of different qualities to different pieces, and then sometimes I even have to work with cracks that happen in the kiln. In this most recent firing, we had a number of fairly severe cracks that came into my pieces, and I have this epoxy material that I can mix with different colors to fill in the cracks in a piece, and I use an epoxy glue called JB Weld. I actually had one piece that broke in half in the last firing, and I was able to glue it back together, and it looks like it wasn't even broken. When the pieces are done being fired, I've developed this hanging mechanism for hanging the pieces. And again, I use JB Weld with it. but you can see what the backs of the pieces look like. I don't know, can we see okay here? And I cut out these pieces of 1x2 and I glue them to the back with the JB weld. Now, in some cases, I actually have to build up some of these areas if they're really large so that I get a good connection of this bar with the back of the piece, because the nice thing about this JB weld is it's one of the few epoxy materials that doesn't drift over time with weight on it. So what happens with most glues is if there's a lot of weight on it, it gradually pulls loose from the piece. This JB weld is used to repair cracks in automobile engines, and it won't do that. And I use these hangers that are screwed into the piece of wood, and then actually there's a nut on there that holds them on, and those then hold a wire that this piece can be hung from. It's kind of a unique hanging system. Also, if there are any other substantial cracks in the back of the piece, you'll see I can also repair those with the JB weld, which is a two-part epoxy. You mix white and black parts together and it produces a glue, basically. And the nice thing about it is it takes a while to set up, so you can work with it. And in some cases, I've even had, I'm going to put this down again, but I have sometimes little pieces. Let's see, is that an example of that? Oh yeah. All right, so this piece here is actually a piece, I don't know if you can tell, barely, but this piece had broken right through here and I repaired it. And this part here had come off during the firing, and I glued that back on with JB weld, and so it doesn't even look like anything happened to it. So again, I've had to evolve techniques to suit the particular pieces and what happens to them. And sometimes these little pieces that stick away from the piece will just, I'll be moving it and it'll break off or something like that. So anyway, that's my art, and I appreciate you being interested. Hope you enjoyed it.